Good afternoon, Peter. Thank you so much for joining me for a Corona conversation. Can I ask you to start off introducing yourself and tell us what you do for a job and where you are in the world?
Good afternoon, everyone, and hi, Adam. My name is Péter Sárosi, and I'm based in Budapest. I work for the human rights NGO called the Drugreporter Foundation. It's a small non-governmental organization. We are only 3 people working for RRF, and we have a website. It's called Drugreporter. Drugreporter has contents in 3 languages: English, Russian, and Hungarian. We also are active on social media, and one of our main focus is producing videos, advocacy videos. We have an online video database on Drugreporter where you can search for videos produced around drug policy or about drug policy and harm reduction. We also train activists and professionals how to make videos, and we organize those people into a network. We call it Drugreporters Video Advocacy Network. So we also help those people to promote their own videos.
It's an amazing way of building capacity within organizations and individuals so they can then tell their story and then have a platform to share that. It's a lovely approach. Now, it is May the 5th, 2020. So most of Europe, most of the world's been in lockdown for 4 to 6 weeks. In some countries, it's starting to change. But could you tell me a little bit about maybe just kind of Hungary, first of all? We know it's not the most liberal regime in the world. It's a country where access to drug treatment isn't that fantastic at the best of times. What's been the impact of COVID on people who drink and take drugs in Hungary?
Yeah, I can tell you some findings from our survey. We have some preliminary findings. We conducted a survey among drug users in Hungary. We asked how the drug market changed, so whether drug prices are going up or accessibility of drugs changed, or did you buy drugs in the dark web. To be frank, I expected more changes than what we really got according to the findings. So most people reported that drug prices are more or less the same, so there is no huge increase in prices. Although they reported that the access to drugs is harder, so it's more difficult to get drugs. Also, what I expected, that more people turn to the dark web to buy drugs. That was not the case. So only a few people reported that they buy drugs in the dark web, and most of them they already had previous experiences. So there are no new customers. According to this survey, of course, our readers at Drugreporter, we got more than 600 responses, which is, I think, pretty good. But most of these people probably they don't belong to the most marginalized groups of drug users. So I don't know what is really happening on the street with injecting drug users, for example. We also asked people whether you use more drugs than before. And the picture is again mixed. So some people use more drugs, some people don't. Some people reported that it's much more difficult to manage withdrawal symptoms. Other people reported it's more or less the same for them. So some people said that they store drugs for a longer period. But it was also, again, it was 20% of the respondents. And most people said they don't really store drugs, and they just go and buy their drugs as it was before the epidemic. So we don't really see, at the moment, we don't really see that kind of big dramatic changes in the Hungarian drug market.
I mean, my guess is, and having spoken to people across the world, that I think a lot of places haven't seen as much shift in the market as they thought. But I wonder that that's maybe because people aren't out using as many drugs, that, dealers have still got supply. It's just there's less people buying, there's less opportunity to go out and party. And if you're a homeless injecting drug user, your major source of funding, whether that's shoplifting or begging, for example, you don't have money now. So dealers have got stock they can't shift. And I wonder if in fact the real problem might be as restrictions are lifted and people then return to using drugs they haven't used for several weeks or several months, perhaps with their tolerance being low, that we run into problems, or dealers maybe suddenly going, we have to get rid of all of our stock. It's going to be entirely unpredictable.
Yep.
You know?
Yeah, I agree with you. And we are pretty much in the beginning of this crisis. We know that this crisis will not just disappear in a few weeks or even months. Probably we will have after effects, and sometimes, you know, quarantine measures can be reintroduced after new infections will go up. So we don't know how this will, in the longer time, how it will affect the drug market. Mm-hmm. And also, as you pointed out, this crisis has a disproportional harm or harmful impact on marginalized people, so who live on the margins of society, and they lost their incomes, and we see that in Hungary as well. Mm-hmm. So, you know, stores, shopping malls are closed. All those, you know, mass tourism related restaurants, pubs, bars are also closed. There is no one on the street, no one begging from. So they are in a kind of humanitarian crisis situation right now. And unfortunately, the government doesn't help much to support these people. Okay. In Hungary, at least.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the takeaway message from people I've spoken to is if you're in a country where the baseline level of service is very good, the response has been really positive and it's been really protective. But in those countries where the baseline level was poor or non-existent, the response has been non-existent and the risk has become huge.
Yeah.
Now, I know you've spoken to lots of people across Europe, and one of the things we're hoping is to demonstrate really good practice. And I know that you've spoken to people in some countries that you wouldn't necessarily expect would have performed really well in reducing risk for people who use drugs and alcohol. Can you tell me about what you know about what's going on in Greece and Athens, for example?
Yeah, in Athens a few years ago, we could witness a huge HIV outbreak among injecting drug users. And there were also budget cuts due after the financial crisis, and many harm reduction programs were shut down or limited. And what we saw at the beginning of this crisis is that at the moment there are quite socially sensitive and good responses to the epidemic from the drug agency, which is OKANA. It's a state drug agency. That the police in Greece has been very repressive to drug users. So they are regularly beating up people on the street, and they are pretty aggressive to drug users, and all the drug user groups are complaining about that. But OKANA as an agency, I think they responded well. They set up an outpost in the middle of the city where they provide harm reduction equipment and COVID tests for people. They also created a new shelter for people who use drugs. It was opened by the mayor of the city, which is, I think it's always important that, the high level political leadership stands behind these initiatives. And in this program, people who use drugs can have access to substitution medicines, because that's one of the main problems. When you want to quarantine people who use drugs who are homeless, without providing them access to drugs, it is not possible to keep the quarantine. So I think it's utmost important to establish a link between opiate substitution programs, medical treatments, and homeless shelters in these times.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen really nice examples of that from people I've spoken to in both Dublin and Berlin. Particularly in Dublin, there was a 12 to 14 week waiting list to get onto opiate substitution treatment. It's now 48 hours. There were 1,500 homeless people. 800 of the most vulnerable have been taken off the street. These services have been able to step up. One of the other things I know that you're very connected to is the whole idea of civil society. and the lessons that COVID can teach us about the importance and value of civil society. Can you say a little bit about that and what your hopes are for the future?
Yeah, I mean, governments usually respond in a quite sluggish, slow way to crisis situations, and that happened now with the COVID epidemic. And what we see is that there were really good, rapid responses from civil society, also like to provide help for people, but also to push governments to change their outdated rules. One example is now, we just reported on Drugreporter by Georgia, and in Georgia, the community of drug users were advocating for changing the rules for opiate substitution treatment. And now, just as you explained in Dublin and Berlin, because of this community activism, the rules were changed, and now the people can take home medications for a longer time. And in all those cities where there is a strong user peer-led movement or groups are present, they always facilitate change, and it is always, I think, very important to have a lively connection to the community. Without that, I think decision makers can just completely misunderstand the situation or make the wrong decisions about how to help them.
So moving forward, hopefully some of those very positive changes in terms of providing easier access to opiate substitution treatment, maybe providing people with more takeaways, these are positive things that could make drug treatment better in the future and may make it more attractive to people. What other changes do you think may arise out of COVID linked to civil society that can make life better for people who choose to use drugs?
Well,
other than just making them illegal and having a regulated market.
I mean, we hear some reports that there are new kind of new cooperation models between civil society and local governments and city leaders, and maybe this crisis can be an eye-opener for some of the city leaders, that how much more effective they can respond to problems when they cooperate with civil society organizations. Of course, for example, those changes, I'm not sure if they can persist after the crisis. For example, when they open up new spaces, new buildings, new hostels for homeless people, and whether those changes can be maintained after the crisis, that's a big question. Because, for example, from Amsterdam, harm reduction workers reported that all the interpersonal conflicts and violence and aggression was completely and significantly reduced after they opened up new spaces for shelters, and people just, they could improve their well-being and health because they have just more space. It's just more humane, and I think that can be also a lesson learned for us, that all these measures, which we thought that they are just emergency measures, maybe we can keep them after the crisis because they just have more benefits.
That the emergency response is providing the very basics that anyone needs to feel safe and secure and move on with their life. It's not rocket science, but it's taken a crisis for governments to listen to civil society. So I just want to ask you finally, I think when governments and other people hear about civil society, I think they think of some underground, deviant, almost terrorist movement that's trying to destabilize society. What do you think governments are now understanding that civil society organizations are really about?
We live in a time when we call this time the shrinking space for civil society, where governments restricting the freedom of assembly, and we see that in many countries they adopted laws that are repressing civil society, just like in my own country. So there is a trend to repress civil society in many countries, even in the European Union.
Because it challenges those in control.
Yeah, that's right. And they also say that, these NGOs are not elected by anyone. What legitimacy they have? And maybe with this crisis, some people can see that how important civil society is. That's the positive interpretation of this. On the other hand, I also see that, for example, in Hungary, there is also some renewed attacks against vulnerable groups. For example, in one part of Budapest, a government politician just started a campaign to veto opening a new homeless shelter there. Just in times of crisis, when all the shelters are overcrowded, and this can mean life and death, or we just saw one article on a pro-government website which was against needle and syringe programs and condemn those organizations that still provide needle and syringes in Hungary. So I don't know how we will come out from this from this crisis in the end, but it's definitely not only a crisis but an opportunity to open the eyes of some people.
So it's going to be very difficult for repressive governments to accept that civil society has something positive to offer, because if they accept that, it undermines their position of authoritarianism and control. Yeah. They almost can't let civil society be too successful.
Yeah, that's right. For example, if you speak about the drug services in Hungary, like 80% of drug services are provided by non-governmental organizations. So it's like the governments in many countries, they just outsourced social services to NGOs. And I think everyone who has any interest in social policies can see that NGOs are much more effective delivering services than big bureaucratic government institutions. But the problem is, that most people don't have this knowledge. They don't have this experience what we have, and they are vulnerable to fear mongering and all these new propaganda measures. What was brought by this so-called post-truth area. What we have now, they know that it is not about the truth. It is about triggering emotions in people and lying to people. So I think that's the big challenge of our age, how we can counteract, or how can we balance this propaganda.
Yeah, it's really sobering thought, because I have a level of naive optimism about the positive change that can occur. But I think you're right. Those people in power still have too much control over the media, and there are too many people susceptible, particularly at a frightening time, to lies and misinformation. So it sounds like your mission of making sure civil society becomes an active partner in the way we lead societies, that's still going to be a challenge.
It is, indeed.
All right. Péter, thank you so much for your time. It would be really good to maybe touch base in about 4 weeks' time to get an update from you both in Hungary, but also globally, because I think you're right. Lockdowns might be lifting, but I imagine they're going to come down again pretty quickly if things don't work out the way that people hope. Please stay safe.
Thank you so much, Adam, and I'm happy to update you in a few months.
That would be wonderful. Stay safe and look after yourself.
Bye.
And so the question that you chose to ask, will it be better where we're going? And though the answer I don't know for a fact, still my heart is saying, oh yeah.
Still just taking it one day at a time. Still don't know what I'm trying to find. Really I don't mind, cause I'll be fine. Yeah, I'll be fine. Yeah, no longer focused on yesterday, and I don't care the rest.
I think what will happen, I hope what will happen is these behaviors will just simply become norms. They'll just simply become normative. It'll be like, you know, if you're out and about or in a meeting and you see someone sort of doing this, you know, with it, then it would be as weird to see as someone sort of taking down their trousers. You think, what are they doing? This is nuts. So that's the kind of thing which means that it's still obviously within our personal responsibility, but it's just become normal. It's like we're not going to be moving back to handshaking anytime soon, you know. That's just really not going to happen. And it's, you know, it's a shame in a way, but, you know, there's other things that we can do to show respect. You know, we can go namaste. So yes, I think it should be empowering. People should be willing to take responsibility, and the vast majority of people are. But in addition to that, around it all will be these norms, hopefully, which will mean that actually it's not even something you have to think about.
I look forward to all of us adopting those things without thinking. And yeah, I for one have, yes, I'm a slow learner, but I will feel reinvigorated after this video talk. Robert, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and dispelling some of the nonsense myths out there, but reminding us how important it is just to stop smoking at any time.
Absolutely. And if I may say one last thing then in relation to that is that in the UK, for example, you know, we think that the COVID has killed probably at this point maybe around 40,000 people. Smoking will kill more than 70,000 people this year. So, you know, we just have to remember that there's a lot of other risks out there, and smoking is a very, very big one.
Thank you. Take care, Robert.
Cheers.
Right, and then I see the disinfectant where it knocks it out in a minute, 1 minute. And is there a way we can do something like that by injection inside or?